Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So for today's letter, we've got Sean and Tamara's story. And before we dive straight into that, just want to take the time to not only introduce, but also welcome to the Ken Reads team, uh, Cody, who a lot of you will probably have seen his content on Instagram already because I've shared a lot of his stuff and I've interacted with him before. Without further ado, welcome, Cody. Would you like to share with everyone a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the introduction, and I'm really excited to be part of the team. A little bit about myself. So I'm a dating relationship coach that specializes in attachment theory. At least that's kind of the little jingle that I've come up with. But my experience is being a clinical psychotherapist, and a majority of the hours that I received was in substance abuse. So I ran an IOP group for quite some time, which is an intensive outpatient for those that are wondering. So I tend to see things through the lens of addiction, even when it comes to relationships, because that informed a lot of my clinical expertise. And my clinical experience in general tends to inform my approach when it comes to relationship problems. But I always wanted to be a dating coach. I didn't necessarily want to be a psychotherapist when I was younger, because I've always found dating and relationships to be really intriguing. And full disclosure, especially when I was younger, I was not the best dater. That was one of the areas of life I really struggled in. I was extremely shy and introverted. So I derived a lot of fulfillment helping other people, but also helping myself kind of overcome some of those sticking points as well. So yeah, I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate you giving the opportunity. And I saw your content pop up. I think I'll obviously kind of see what you agree with here. There's probably certain points that maybe we disagree on from time to time, but I think overall our styles are quite similar, in the way that we approach anxious avoidant relationships is also quite similar. So I'm excited to kind of unpack this letter.
Yeah, likewise. And look, on the note of like, where we align, I think it's one of those things where I think we're generally pretty much on the same page when it comes to these attachment related issues and how they show up. And also that in fact it's funny, I think a lot of these dynamics do have very similar traits to people who are going through addiction as well too. So I think your background, with addiction and psychotherapy would definitely inform you a lot in terms of how the anxious avoidant trap can occur in relationships too. Alrighty, let's get into this letter. So, Sean writes, I dated Tamara, who is 37, I'm 45, from June to September this year, so presumably 2024. It was a short, intense relationship, something I hadn't experienced before. We matched on a dating app where she messaged me first and suggested meeting in 5 days, which was quick for two single parents. I have two boys, she has three. We texted a little and she asked about my intentions, making it clear she wanted a relationship. I assured her I did too. Our first date went well, although she asked strange questions like how many women I had slept with since my separation. When I mentioned a platonic female friend, she asked if we'd slept together. At the end of the date, we kissed intensely for 30 minutes, which was in my experience unusual, but she seemed very into me, texting me when she got home that she wanted more. I'm actually going to pause here. Normally, I usually read a bit more, but I feel like already in one paragraph, we've already got a lot. What are your thoughts on this already, Cody?
Yeah, so initial impression. Well, actually, the first thing that I was battering around was the age gap, potential age gap, because I mean that can influence a relationship. It doesn't seem like it's an extreme age gap, but there is an age gap. But the biggest thing to me is the woman in this situation definitely sounds anxiously attached so far. Obviously, I don't want to draw any immediate conclusions, but some of the questions that she's asking, you can almost like feel the nervousness just through reading that little portion.
I completely agree with you. There's definitely a lot of interest in Sean's dating history as well. Like, how many relationships has he had since he's separated? What's going on with his platonic female friend? And, I've got to give Sean credit where it's due. He seems quite in touch with the fact that this is intense. Like, he's, on one hand, I think it sounds like, he's enjoying this first date, it does sound like he's also not letting some of those other emotions slip by him, which sound like he's feeling a bit overwhelmed by how into him Tamara is.
For sure. The other thing too is some like potential retroactive jealousy on her part as well. Maybe that's something that she struggles with, and that also goes hand in hand with the anxious attachment.
You know what I was also thinking too, and this is, I'm wondering if this shows up, is I almost wondered too if that comment was coming out of a place of fear of being cheated on, betrayed, or concerned that someone might come in to interfere with the relationship, which can also be a bit fearful avoidant sort of stuff as well too. So it could be a little bit of that, but I mean it's too early to tell so far, but I think it's definitely there's a lot of stuff coming out already. So let's continue. The next day, Tamara messaged to say she wasn't quote unquote easy and wanted assurance I wasn't just after sex. I assured her I was on the same page. The next few dates went well with long makeout sessions, 1.5 hours after each one. We saw each other every chance we had about 3 times a fortnight and texted and called regularly. On our fourth date, she shared the details of her marriage breakup. Her ex-husband had cheated on it. There we go. Had cheated on her with over, whoa, 100 women, but she stayed with him for another 3 years before leaving. Despite this, she said she had a good co-parenting relationship with him and said, quote unquote, he wasn't a bad person, he just did a bad thing. I found this odd, but didn't press her on this. Then the love bombing started. She said things like, I'm lucky, I didn't expect to meet someone like you. And she also mentioned, I can't stop thinking about you, and that I hadn't felt that way for a long time. You're amazing, Sean. One time after physical intimacy, she said, you're a god. She also began sexting me as well. We become very close in a short time and agreed to become exclusive boyfriend girlfriend 3 weeks after first meeting, after 6 dates. I'm going to take a pause here. This is a lot. Like, to me, I'm like, whoa. Like, there's a lot coming out of Tamara. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
Yeah, this is a psychotherapist's dream right here. I mean, this is 10 sessions worth minimum, I'm saying. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so much there. There's one thing that you told me that's really resonated, and I haven't had someone else necessarily put it so succinctly, but intensity early on is a red flag, generally speaking. And it speaks of insecure attachment. I mean, that's just like written all over the walls here.
I agree with you completely. By the way, I just want to circle back to what you said about how this is a psychotherapist's dream. I was wondering, would that be for Sean or for Tamara in the next session?
I
Or
think everybody involved here. Yeah, I
yeah,
think everyone involved. I mean, yeah, this is some interesting stuff. Interesting stuff to say the least. And 100 women, that's insane. And the fact that she hung in the pocket, I mean, you know, it kind of speaks for itself.
it does. And to me, what's really interesting is how she rationalizes and says he's done bad things, but he's not a bad man. Now, I might say that because I'm, detached from a lot of this stuff and say, hey, I could look back at my ex and say, Yeah, like, I don't think he's malicious, but I think he's done stupid shit. And I also think he needs to work on himself. But I think I wouldn't be necessarily saying that right off the back of being that badly abused over and over again. Like, to me, it sort of feels like there's a bit of denial, and also she's not wanting to just accept the fact that she got really screwed over, like really badly by this guy. And it's interesting too, because she's obviously hyper vigilant about having that experience happen again. Hence why she was, asking Sean about his what's he's been up to since he separated from his wife. But yeah, to me, I'm sensing that she's not quite comfortable with accepting like the full pain that's happened to her.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good point. And that could speak to a fearful avoidant bent here because she could have just pushed that down. She doesn't have the resources to actually process what happened. I mean, 100 different people, that's insane, you know? So it seems like it could have been so traumatizing that she just shut it out, put it in a little box and hasn't even touched it. But the um the fears with her current partner, that is coming to the surface, which maybe because it's early on, like the stakes are still fairly low. She has the resources to kind of deal with it. She doesn't want it to happen again. But yeah, it does seem like it's almost like Stockholm syndrome, like with this previous guy, where
Do you know,
yeah,
it's so funny you should actually say that. I've been doing this course on relationship OCD, and it's basically involving internal family systems and parts work. And I know for a fact that one of the key protector parts that we have inside of us is denial, and also trying to get along with difficult people. Because if you've had caregivers who've repeatedly abused you, it can be very hard to accept the fact that they're out to get you. And so I almost wonder if that's playing itself out even here as well too, where there's this like part of her which just for one reason or another can't accept, the full damage that's been done to her too.
for sure. And the thing that can be really hard is she might go to a therapist that is more just kind of, peace and love and kind of free spirited. She just wants to validate, like, yeah, I mean, he probably wasn't a monster and he had certain things that he was working through. When, I mean, that's why I like being a coach is I'm a little bit more direct as if I was in my clinical practice. And I'd be like, no, this guy has severe sex addiction. And what he did is not okay. Like, not only is it not okay, but it's like on an epic scale that I don't see in my clinical practice. Like, that's outlandish.
And he's also, I mean, the fact that she's cited 100 times makes me think, I reckon he would have a body count. Like, I reckon, and it's something that I think people need to be aware of, is that sex addicts have a tendency to count their, the number of people they've slept with. And I think there is so much shame attached to that, because I think a lot of them tie their self-worth to the amount of people that they've slept with as well, too. So that's a little bit of trivia for everyone who's interested in that. But let's continue. So, Tamara shared the details of her complicated family. She wasn't close at all with her mother and would go several months at a time without seeing or speaking to her. She said her mum had fucked me up. As a result of this relationship, Tamara said she'd been in therapy for over 10 years and was on SSRIs. She had a brother, but rarely spoke to him either. However, she was very close to her dad. Oh dear. Yeah, I've got a thought on this in a minute that I'll share. And in fact, had told him about her relationship with me. She said that that was a big deal for her to tell him about someone. Tamara would also share details about me with her friends, so I thought she was developing feelings for me. In mid-July, I had major jaw surgery. Despite having only known each other for 6 weeks, she drove me to the hospital and let me stay at her place for 3 nights. She even lent me the key. I thought I'd found someone special. She was kind, supportive, empathetic. Our dates slowed due to my recovery, but we still spent a lot of time together at her place. During our relationship, she only came to my place once to pick me up on the day of my surgery. Otherwise, we're always at her place. We talked about taking weekend getaways and staycations in the city to enjoy some fine dining. She even suggested we take an overseas holiday in January 2025. I did notice all the things she suggested we do together were similar to what she used to do with her ex-husband. Oh dear. I was open to all of this, but felt it was moving fast. I didn't voice this concern. During our talk, she said she thought I was very calming and had shared this with a friend who told her that's exactly what to look for in a guy. Although we were from very different backgrounds, she grew up in an affluent area, I was middle class, I thought we'd bonded well. However, I had noticed some differences between us. She spent more she spent more freely than I did with her money, especially on online shopping and eating out. From my observations, her life seemed chaotic, which she described as crazy. She was very keen to fit in with the school mums at her boys' private school, hosting girls' nights, and later admitting some of them did cocaine, and she sometimes joined in. I expressed my disapproval, but she said it was quote unquote not that bad and didn't do it very often. Okay, let's pause here. There's obviously, you said 10 sessions. I'm thinking we can ratchet that number up. I feel like there's so many things we could get out of this. What are your thoughts?
I'm telling you, yeah, this is some good stuff. This would be a lot of processing. First thing that comes to mind for me is that she has a mother wound that she's now acknowledged in this little passage here. And then that's tied to this numbing behavior with, doing drugs or substances. And this is my opinion, obviously. I'm not for 100% fact, but that would be my initial impression. And then she mentioned that she's close with her father. If I had her, across the couch here, I'd be asking more probing questions about that just to get a better scoop on what that actually looks like.
Yeah, it's so funny you should say that because I was also thinking that too. My head was thinking, well, hang on a minute. She's dated a guy who repeatedly cheated on her, and she said he's not that bad. He's all right. He does bad things. My brain went, that sounds to me like an excuse, and it sounds to me like that probably would have been informed by her father's behavior. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if her dad might actually be more emotionally unavailable than she lets on, and she sort of brushes his bad behavior off. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I see this a lot with people that are fearfully avoidant attached is a lot of times they'll tell me how one of their parents is maybe overbearing and maybe even abusive, but the other parent is like not in the picture at all. So if
Yes.
you think about that on the receiving end, it's like, well, this poor girl, like kind of she had to deal with the fact that like her dad is present, and I'm sure like he's obviously not a perfect person. He's gonna have certain shortcomings, but at least he was in her life compared to her mom. It doesn't sound like she had any involvement at all. So that's hard to reconcile, especially when you're a child. It's impossible to reconcile when you're a child.
I completely agree. And it sounds to me like, on top of that family background, the fact that she's living a life that she even quotes is crazy with her overspending, the drugs with the high school mums. To me, I think we're getting into a bit of a flavor here of attachment style that isn't, I wouldn't say it's exclusively anxiously attached. Like, to me, I'm not saying anxious attachers can't do this, but to me, there's just something about this which feels like there's a lot of there's a lot of turbulence that would be very consistent with someone who has a fearful avoidant attachment style. And I think that another thing I've also noticed too is going back to some of the compliments she was sharing with Sean about how he was a god in bed and all this other stuff, very pedestal-y sort of language, like very much like, oh my God, you're like the best. And I know that when we're, high on oxytocin, we can say this sort of stuff. I get that. But it just seems like she's almost like worshipping the ground that you walk and giving a lot of like flowery, florid language to describe how amazing you are. And I believe a lot of that's genuine. But again, I go back to that word you were using before, Cody, of it's intense.
Absolutely. The word that comes to mind for me is fawning, fawn response. This does seem like a trauma response for sure that she has picked up over the years.
And you know what, though? I also think too that Sean also might be exhibiting a little bit of that too, because I remember, apparently he had noticed in one instance that when they were planning activities to do together, she was voicing all these activities that she used to do with her ex-husband, who I presume is the one who was cheating on her. And to me, when I hear that, that makes me think a couple of things. One is the fact that she obviously, I don't think, has reconciled all of her feelings for her ex-husband, because if she's still wanting to play out a lot of that, there's still a lot of that emotion that's there. But two, for Sean, suggests to me he didn't feel safe to be able to bring this up to her as well, too.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about the woman in the situation here, but yeah, to shift focus to Sean, I mean, from like a dating coaching standpoint here, he's blowing past a lot of like huge red flags. Not just flags, these are banners, and he's still hanging in the pocket apparently. So I'm definitely curious to see what his specific questions are kind of near the end of this.
Yeah, I wonder if he's actually written any too, because as always, I don't usually read these in advance. I sort of just go, off the cuff. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he has any. Otherwise, I will maybe just offer my own 2 cents on some of this stuff with you too, Cody, too. But anyways, let's continue. I felt the relationship was going well, but sensed we weren't that close emotionally. There was intensity, oh yeah. And the love bombing made me feel amazing. I bet it did. By late August, 4 weeks post-surgery, I began to feel her pulling away, but the sexting continued, which left me confused. Her last sext was 4 days before she broke things off. I went through my messages with Tamara when writing this letter, and I found one I received about 2 weeks before she abruptly ended things. I believe this may be the day she deactivated, as her communication became less frequent from this point on. Tamara wrote, I just had the most weird and emotional morning. So many things came at me all at once, only just got to work. And she sent that at midday, and she usually starts work at 9 a.m. We did speak on the phone later that day, but I can't recall her reasoning for feeling the way she did earlier that day. In early September, we had a lunch date planned, but the day before, she asked if I could come to her place instead. She wanted to, quote unquote, talk about us. She then asked if I could call her. We spoke on the phone and she broke up with me. We had never had an argument. She tried to explain to me her reasoning, but none of it made sense. She said I was good for her now, but not long term, that we weren't compatible, we valued different things, and that we were different people. She said I didn't do anything wrong and that I couldn't change who I was. I kept saying, I don't understand, but I was unable to get a clear answer. I was devastated and completely blindsided. I sensed some emotion in her. She sounded a bit detached, yet we left it open to possibly remain friends and left it at that. I know there's more to this letter and I'm keen to get to it, but Jesus fucking Christ. I'm really sorry, Sean, because, you know, like Cody and I was saying at the beginning, this was looking like Anxious Attacher City, but it quickly revealed that it's definitely not.
Yeah, that's a really hard lesson to learn firsthand is to have that love bombing. It feels good. They're putting you on a pedestal. And if you haven't been through this type of situation, you're going to interpret it as genuine. And then just to have them discard you, I mean, that can really hit people out of nowhere, which is why I get messages on a daily basis from people going through similar situations and how painful it is. It's hard to reconcile. It's hard to you know, figure out why that happened at first.
And it's very easy too to think that it's Machiavellian and that there's like some, ulterior motive at times behind this as well too, because love bombing typically I think was used to describe very malicious behavior from people who wanted to coerce and overwhelm someone for their benefit. But with this, I feel like, the future faking of the plans they could do together, the staycation, telling you you're a god. Like, I do think there was a lot of genuine positive emotion there for you, Sean. But I do think at the same time, like, you know, it's one of those things where when I say intensity is a red flag, it's because dysregulated emotions mean that we can flip-flop from like loving to despising someone very quickly if we don't feel like someone lives up to our expectations. And one thing I know for a lot of fearful avoidance is that when they're getting closer to someone, their mind can become like a melting pot of so many different thoughts and feelings where 1 minute they can be thinking you're amazing, and then another minute they're getting the ick and finding you absolutely disgusting to be with. So you're not really seeing that. As you shared, she sends that text message saying how weird she feels at midday when she's supposed to be at work. And I think that probably was a point where she was probably going through these oscillating thoughts and feelings, but it's not fair to you because she's not communicating what's on her mind.
For sure. Yeah, when I say that the actions are ingenuine with the love bombing, perhaps ingenuine is the wrong word. It's ingenuine in the sense that the actions ultimately aren't aligning with the words.
Fair.
Um, so that's what I mean by that. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to kind of avoidance when they're doing the love bombing, it's not in this large, like Machiavellian scheme that they have all planned out and plotted. It's more so in the moment they feel a certain way. And then once they actually get a taste of that true intimacy or a glimpse of a long-term relationship, that's when that fear kicks in and overrides their nervous system. So then you see them backing away. So it feels genuine to them a lot of times in the moment, but it's not qualified intimacy is how I like to describe it. So it's like a form of currency, but it's not backed by anything real. It's not backed by gold.
No, it's like crypto and other forms of currency. Like By the way, that's if anyone's doing crypto out there who's listening to me, I apologize. It's not meant to be. I'm not using that as a criticism to anyone who does that. More power to you, but it's more just to say it's like a financial pipe dream. It sounds good in the moment, but when the dust settles and the bottom falls out, it doesn't, it's not going to give you the gains you invested.
For sure. If it was like a form of cryptocurrency, it would be like a meme coin where it's super volatile and hasn't been on the market for a long time and you can't trust it.
Was that Dogcoin at one point?
Dogecoin, there's Haktua coin, there's all sorts of crazy coins.
And now there's Fearful Avoidant Coin.
Now there should be a fearful avoidant coin. Yeah.
It's going to sound
Whatever
great
makes it
in the
stick in
beginning.
whatever makes it sticks in people's head, you know?
True. And I tell you what, when people have lost a lot of money, it's, that devastation can hit people almost as hard as like emotional devastation as well, too. Well, there's that as well. But anyways, I'm not going to stretch that analogy more than it needs to be. So a week later, I messaged her as I was struggling without any contact. She seemed fine, saying she was looking forward to her holiday. When I said I was okay but in shock and would be nice to catch up when she returned, she said we should have some time apart to let things settle. The next day, the next day, she blocked me on Facebook. I didn't expect to hear from her again, but after returning from her holiday, she messaged to check in and see how I was doing. We had a brief exchange, but she didn't seem fully engaged, leaving me wondering what the purpose was behind her reaching out to me. A week later, I decided I needed to get a few things off my chest and sent one final text to her. I asked her how she felt about her decision and how she was feeling. I explained I missed our connection and couldn't understand why she decided to end things as I felt we had a really good thing going and thought she felt the same way. She thanked me for my honesty and vulnerability, but said her previous message was just to check if I was okay. She said we had a good connection in some ways, but we were different in other ways, in needs and wants. That no one needs to change who they are to be in a relationship. That's not good enough for anyone. She said she was grateful for the time we had. I pushed back against this, saying we hadn't discussed wants and needs, which made it hard to meet them. I said she was so kind and gracious during my initial recovery, but it felt unfair she had made the decision we weren't right for each other later during my recovery. I said her choosing to end our relationship over the phone hurt me too. She replied saying she was sorry I was hurt, but you know me, and you know that I hate hurting anyone. 3 weeks later, she unfollowed me on Instagram. Okay, let's take a pause here. What the fuck? Like this is shit for sure.
That's rough for sure. Yeah. From again the dating coaching perspective here for me, like I'd be if he was in front of my couch and I was talking to him, I'd be like, "Hey, why are we going back and forth with this woman still? This is where we're getting into the territory of you're gonna start hurting your own feelings and you're not gonna get the answers that you want." Now I completely validate where he's coming from because I myself have been in his shoes before where you want certain answers, you want closure, quote unquote. But the quicker that you just rip that band-aid off and you get distance, the quicker you're going to heal. Easier said than done, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of look at it from a little bit of a different perspective, being like, I too would be probably doing what Sean's done as well too, because I've done that as well. My approach would be more like, yeah, if you want to get your answers, go ahead. Like, just see what you're going to get. But it's going to lead to, I think you and I would both agree, disappointment. My attitude is disappointment can be healing in some ways, even though that sounds like an oxymoron. But I think that one thing I will say is I feel like in the time that she broke up with you to the time that you had that final exchange, she's given you the invitation to remain friends. She's said to you that you should respect her space, then she blocked you. Then she reached out to you to see how you were doing. Then, when you wanted to clarify where things were at between the two of you, she came at you with some pseudo rationalization about how, you know, no one should change, wants and needs XYZ, this, ABC, that. And it was hard for them to be met. And that no one, and also a bunch of other stuff too, like very psychobabbly sort of stuff too. I mean, that's confusing as fuck. And I do feel sorry for anyone who's been on, in a similar position because it's all on her terms.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I tend to try to advocate for a conservative approach and a distancing approach once this type of behavior starts. Because the more you try to negotiate with someone that is clearly flip-flopping back and forth and is not in an irrational state of mind, the risk is that they're going to pull you into that emotional state with them. I mean, the guy is obviously going to be emotional here as well. I'm sure he's very disappointed, he's confused. And to have both nervous systems that are dysregulated going back and forth, it's never going to lead to something positive.
You're very right. And also, I will say, I don't know if you've ever experienced this too, Cody, or any of your clients have, but like this is also starting the recipe up for potential boomeranging as well too. And we know that fearful avoidants have a much higher proclivity for boomeranging than dismissives do. And she's already technically boomeranged by reaching out to see how you were doing post breakup. This is where things can, like another layer of addiction can be added as well too, because if you don't realize that this is someone you cannot trust your well-being with because everything is dictated by their emotional dysregulation, you're going to get wiped out.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, this is that choice point where you can either choose to get off the roller coaster or you can buckle up because it's going to get really bad in that hot and cold type of pattern.
Exactly. And also, I don't know about you, but like I dare say this probably, and I'm not saying this to give false hope or to freak Sean out, but this may not necessarily be the last time that Tamara reaches out because, you know, individuals who are this dysregulated, who have fear of abandonment and fear of intimacy, notoriously do bounce back and forth. So she's shown a little bit of evidence of that as well. But I think if one thing is based on history, is the fact that she thought her ex, who, cheated on her over 100 times, was not a bad man. To me, when I hear that, semantics aside and my points aside, like to me, when I hear that, I'm just thinking she doesn't know healthy. Like maybe she understands conceptually what healthy is, but inside of her, absolutely not.
That's a really great point for sure. I mean, she's exposing her judgment and value system to this guy, and that's not changing anytime soon. So if you do buckle in, I mean, you kind of know what you're going to get from that point forward. One of the questions I get asked a lot when people DM me is if their avoidant ex is going to come back around. And it's an interesting question from me because I understand why they're asking it, of course. And they're in that moment, emotionally, their greatest fear is that their avoidant ex is never going to reach back out to them again. And it's hard for them to conceptualize that. But a lot of times, and sometimes I even responded to this directly, I'll be like, the worst thing that could happen is they do boomerang back.
I
Because then
agree.
you're caught in that washing cycle, that rinse and repeat. So you better hope that they don't reach back out because your nervous system is not regulated yet. And the temptation to get pulled into that is going to be really strong a lot of times.
I actually have to agree with you. Look, I don't mind if like a client, reaches out with an avoidant and wants to sort of like shoot the shit with them, so to speak, and wants to see if like there's any opportunity to make it work again because failure is a funny way of learning things sometimes. But what I will say out of compassion is, look, I get it. I've been there, bought the shirt. I know what it's like to be in a position where you're vulnerable and you wanted to make it work with this person before, their emotions got the better of them. But I think that you've got to, like, if I'm being really coach-like, if you will, you've got to consider your well-being first in this because being with someone like Tamara, though I don't think she's a bad person, but she's going to be bad for your well-being because she cannot be trusted to stay consistent in her feelings for you when she's this dysregulated.
100%. Yep. Yeah, again, I've been there myself, so I would never judge a client for being honest with me and being vulnerable and telling me that they have the temptation to go back, or maybe they did relapse and they did go back. I'm never going to judge them for that. It's something that I've kind of done myself, and it
Makes
doesn't
sense.
end well. I even will tell them that I'm like, hey, this movie does not end the way that you want it to. So you can choose to watch the ending of the movie, but that secure person is going to choose to not have to watch the end of the movie. They're going to get off the ride because they know how it ends. They don't need to watch it again.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you've said. And you know, it's one of those things where I have to remind everyone too, like if they haven't worked through their insecure attachment, and even the 10 years that, Tamara's had in therapy, doesn't sound like it's scratched a lot of those fears of intimacy that she has deep down, which is not to say that it's been useless. It's just to say that it's not been targeting stuff that would be pertinent to making a relationship work with you, Sean.
100%. Yep. And a lot of times too, I'll tell people that like they might tell me how their avoidant ex or maybe their avoidant partner is currently in therapy, and they kind of use this as a justification to entertain their attention more and to double down on the relationship. But that doesn't mean that they're actually processing what's going to help them and their avoidance with their therapist. The nature of avoidance is to avoid.
And it's very easy for a panicky avoidant to go to a clinician and say, I just think I need to leave my ex because they're needy in this and that and the other. And, in my experience, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, Cody, um, people often struggle to leave bad relationships more than good ones, meaning that if you're an avoidant attacher, your proclivity is probably to stay in bad relationships and need a lot of coaxing to get out of them because it's not healthy for you. But then it's very easy for you because of your understandable fears of intimacy to eject out of a more, let's just say, healthier relationship. So it's one of those things where when you look at it on the surface as an outsider who doesn't understand this, it's so easy to see the whole like, oh, if they wanted to, they would. They're just not that into you rhetorics, right? But from a trauma-informed perspective, it's much more complicated than that. And I think that a lot of people struggle to see that if in Tamara's case, she is someone who's probably even more likely to bounce back to her abusive ex, her cheating ex, than she is to stay with Sean because of where she's at.
Yeah, that's another good point too. Yeah, I don't
So,
know if I have too much more to add on that part. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be someone that, like you said, is not a bad person, but she's going to be very bad for your well-being.
yeah, I completely agree. So just to round out Sean's letter, he writes, I felt discarded. Well, you absolutely were. It seemed like our time together hadn't mattered. When she ended things, she said she was done with online dating and was going to focus on her career. She's very ambitious in her career. She works as a real estate agent. Yet a couple of weeks later, her new dating profile popped up on Bumble. I knew this would happen, but found it quite jarring. Her profile said she was looking for a life partner with someone who is kind, empathetic, qualities I'd shown her during our time together. I wish I had advocated for myself more during the relationship and had not been so people pleasing. I suspect she ended it because she experienced discomfort after deactivating. I wonder if she has much experience in healthy relationships. But what was the point of reaching out to me after her holiday? Does she have any self-awareness of how she acted during the relationship compared to how abruptly she ended things and her behavior since? I sense she feels a lot of shame. Thanks again. Wow, Sean, I feel really sorry for you. I'll happily answer those questions with Cody in just a hot second. I know they're more hypotheticals than questions, but you know, um, you've been through the ringer. I'm really sorry that you've gone through that. That was a discard. Cody, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the questions that he's asking near the end there are also very common questions that get asked. And I definitely understand why people ask those questions. And um, you want to think that the person that did you dirty, there's no other way to say it, is going to come to certain conclusions for themselves so that way they can grow and either not come back around to hurt you again, or they're not going to hurt other people in the future and things are going to be all hunky dory. I mean, it just makes the grieving process easier if those things happen to be true. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, you obviously can't control someone else's healing journey. They're gonna heal the way that they're gonna heal, or they're not gonna heal the way that they're, supposed to heal. They're gonna do what they're gonna do. And um, again, earlier in the letter, she described how this ex that cheated on her with 100 different people was not that bad of a guy, and she was rationalizing. So that again tells you all that you need to know about her current mental state and what she's able to come to terms with.
Yep. I've dated guys that are like Tamara, where they've said, my last ex was abusive and throwing bowls at my face, but he was otherwise a great guy. And I'm thinking, if that's normal for you, I don't think you quite know what it feels like to be in something different from that. And I've had to make executive choices on myself and be like, I actually don't, I like you, but I don't trust you to date, and I'm not doing this. A lot of that comes with knowledge and time and energy and, experience with stuff. You just get more used to it. But I think it's one of those things where I want to make it very clear. If you've been in an abusive relationship, I am not discounting you from love or also being a worthy partner. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you are normalizing an abusive relationship as being, you know, okay, that gives me massive alarm bells.
Absolutely. I think one helpful tool for people out there is to look at what someone else thinks is normal. And I know that sounds super simple. We don't usually think of things that way though. The way that she's describing the ex, um, and kind of how she's showing up in this current relationship, that tells you what her baseline normalcy is of relationships. And it's extremely dysfunctional from the outside. I mean, as a clinician, I see this, and the dysfunction is obvious, right? But the fact that she's not talking like a secure person here tells you that she's still insecurely attached. A secure person would be like, hey, if you're having the conversation about exes, I had an ex that did some really heinous things. They cheated on me with what I think was around 100 people, if not more. I found out about it, and let's say that they did stay. I stayed longer than I should have. I learned a lot. It was extremely painful, and I've done a lot of self development to try to move on. And thankfully, I'm in a more secure place, so I can talk about this with you and not get emotional. And I do want to date and find someone that's very much not like that and is stable and secure. I mean, that would be the conversation that you'd have. I didn't get any hints of that.
Do you know what's so interesting that you said that as well too? Is the other thought that came to my mind was also she wouldn't also be asking what Sean's relationship history had been leading up to meeting her, meaning that she wouldn't have had that panicky, like, oh, how many girls have you been with since? Or, you know, what's the situation between you and your best friend? Like that, if it were to come up, she would have expressed it very differently and probably would have negotiated that conversation far down the line and also had to work on a lot of those insecurities inside of herself, probably with a therapist.
Yep, those two things are intertwined for sure. And she folded her cards when it came to that past trauma, the way that she was bringing up those jealousy problems with him.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was chatting with a colleague about this the other day, and she was basically saying, I had to learn not to allow myself to trust someone in terms of what they think, where they think they're at in terms of their healing. Meaning that if someone says, I'm a anxious attacher or an avoidant or so and so, I'm a whatever it may be in therapy, she was saying, I need to just trust my own judgment to evaluate the other person and be like, if this person, even if they say all that, if they haven't overcome their avoidancy, their attachment issues, whatever it may be, I have the right to actually disqualify them, which might sound harsh, but the reality is that it's very easy to listen to someone say, I'm in therapy, I have XYZ, ABC, wonderful. But if their actions aren't aligned with someone who's taking accountability for that or is being, as you said, secure in their language and their behavior, you've got to actually make some decisions on behalf of both of you.
That's a really good point as well. And I haven't necessarily talked to therapist colleagues about that point. I think it's a really good point. And I would notice this when I worked at my old agency. There'd be certain clients that would come in and they would come just pre-stocked with labels for themselves. Like, I'm anxiously attached, I have OCD, and they have all these like terms that they're throwing around. And as a clinician, obviously you always want to have that unconditional positive regard. You want them to be able to grow, you want to help them. But at the same time, just because they come in with certain diagnostic labels, that doesn't mean that you buy into it and you jump on the ship with them.
Yes.
No, like I'm sitting back and I'm like, no, okay, you have these diagnostic labels, but show me the criteria that backs them up. Let's see the behaviors over time. And a lot of times, what you'll see is they have ulterior motives for labeling themselves with those terms, whether it's to get resources or whether it's just to craft a certain narrative for themselves. And I'm not saying that everyone's doing this Machiavellian style, to try to twist their perceptions, but you want to really just tune into your gut and see like how that feels, whether you're a clinician or not. If someone's coming in with certain labels for themselves or other people, I would just be a little bit skeptical. Like wait for the facts to match up to that.
I completely agree. And even what you were saying when you were describing that, it's not invalidating the client and saying that you're wrong, I disagree, I'm going to challenge you on every diagnosis you have. It's more saying, be patient, take your time with it. And what is that also like? Going slow and dating, meaning that don't allow yourself to become whelmed by intensity and rush. And to Sean, your credit, look, actually, I got to be honest. I know you said you people pleased, but based on this letter alone, I gotta say, I didn't really feel like you had huge anxiously attached qualities. You're empathetic. I think I think the fact that you were, like, as I was reading it, I was thinking, yeah, there's some fawning coming out, but not that much. Like, to be honest, it was a very short experience. You called her out on some things. You mentioned in this letter that some things didn't feel quite right, that there was intensity. I actually, based on this, I'd say if this was all I had of you, I am not sensing you're someone with like significant insecure attachment based on this.
No, yeah, it sounds like this guy stumbled into an interesting case, but he didn't do anything egregiously wrong, in my opinion, at least based off of what he shared with us. Obviously, again, I validate where he's coming from and the confusion that he's probably feeling here. But um, again, I have people that DM me and they're sharing the story of what's going on and what they've been doing. And sometimes people go off the rails and they get sucked into this toxic dynamic themselves, and then they're asking me like, "Oh, what do I do?" I'm like, "Well, there's so many different things going on here, like we got to stop X, Y, and Z before you even have a chance at starting to heal."
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for someone like Sean, I think, he just sounds like he was blindsided by the intensity of it all. And I think, I mean, I know you're not really asking for advice, Sean, but I'd say like if I was to put my dating coach hat on, which I haven't put on for quite a while, I'd probably say you just need to have, renewed boundaries and take things much slower going forward. Hell, controversially, you're probably going to date some more people who are avoidantly attached going forward. That's not necessarily a bad thing if you can learn to pick up the signs quicker and just learn to opt out quicker.
For sure. Yeah. One thing that I espouse people to at least try is this idea of sex exclusivity, where you're not sleeping with someone until you are exclusive and you've built a certain amount of trust. Because when you start layering on that physical intensity and that passion, you could definitely look past red flags, and then you're sliding into a situation that might not be good for you.
I've actually done that before as well too, and I'd say it's even though it's a very boundaried way of doing things, and at times it can veer on the in the realm of being a little bit too guarded. I will say in recovery, it's actually a great idea because it puts your well-being first, and it's a way of helping you go back into the dating scene to feel more trust. And frankly, there are so many great people out there, but we don't have to accept all of them. Meaning that, okay, if you need your walls as high as the Great Wall of China, fantastic, go ahead, do it. It's actually good for you to do that for a period of time because it'll help you feel like, okay, I can navigate this, I can wade myself back into the dating pool and I have the right to, say no to certain people. And I think when it comes to the sex piece, even though that piece of advice I think normally would be meant specific, because I know it's used typically for women, I have to say I think it's good for all genders across sexualities as well too, because it really allows you to regain a sense of self-control. So you're not necessarily too overwhelmed by a lot of that love bombing that can occur, particularly with people like this.
Yep. And some people will approach that idea from the lens of morality or even religion. But I approach it mostly from the standpoint of nervous system regulation. And if you're someone that finds themselves to become really anxious in the early stages of dating, and you start to get jealous or you start to second guess things, especially when things are physically intimate, then remove that ingredient. Because, in my opinion, that ingredient isn't necessary in the early stages to get to know someone and to see their character.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think that like I said, even though it may have been traditionally meant for women and it might have been used, as you said, under different contexts, if it feels like it's something that will be of help for people going back out into dating, have at it. Like I think we've got to try different things every now and then to feel confident with what we do. So yeah, I think there's a lot of sense there. Just rounding out, I know that Sean mentioned a couple of things. He asked, what was the point of Tamara reaching out to me after her holiday? I mean, to me, I think that was probably a great example of where she was having maybe a bit of a fear of abandonment moment and wanting to reach out to you because she's oscillating between loss and fear of intimacy. So to me, I don't think it was necessarily a sign of her wanting to get back out and be with you in that moment. I think it was more of her not wanting to lose complete connection with you, but it's very much on her terms. What do you think of that, Cody?
Yep, I would agree with that for sure. And this is very common to see, especially from avoidance, where they're trying to exit the relationship or the situation, and they're playing a game where they want to try to exit as cleanly and as comfortably as possible, because to a certain degree, that's human nature. Like you're going to try to get the information that you feel like you want or need, so that way you can move on or to start talking to someone new, or whatever strategy you're going to employ, you're going to try to collect those pieces. But unfortunately, for the person that's more on the side of anxious attachment or the one that's getting discarded, you might interpret that as a sign that maybe they do value you and they're coming to certain insights all of a sudden. But you have to look at the timeline here. If it's coming at the end of you guys getting to know each other and going through, these miscommunications or whatever it might be, it's not a good sign. So the timing is really important.
Yep, I completely agree with you on that one. And we've got another question here too, which is, does Tamara have any self-awareness of how she acted during the relationship compared to how abruptly she ended things and her behavior since? And there's a bit of an extra bit to that, which is I sense she feels a lot of shame. What would you say to that, Cody?
I'm going to be kind of just the raw truth guy again here and say that she probably does not have a lot of shame. Or if she does have shame, it's so buried because with avoidance, usually severe avoidance, it's not like, I don't know, she has to just come to conclusion with what happened with this recent situation. She probably hasn't come to conclusion with the original trauma, which is abandonment from her mom and this mother wound. So you got to like retrace steps all the way back to that, which she clearly has not done, at least not in a meaningful way.
I agree. I mean, look, I personally would say there likely is a lot of shame, but it's probably not something that she wants to necessarily delve into and work on at any particular moment. As for the degree of self-awareness in terms of how she acted during the relationship, I think, well, we know that she's definitely got a bit of denial at play. I think if we remove that, I'm going to just be open and say I think she would have at least a degree of awareness of how she's behaved. Um, because this kind of goes to a question of intent in my mind. I'm thinking, even if she tries to deny what's happened and to rationalize it away, all of that, it's just self-protection from the truth. And so my answer is I think she would. I think she'd absolutely have a degree of awareness of how she's behaved before and after. And I think that also is probably informing her behavior to, try and get away as cleanly as possible. Nothing to see here. I'm not the bad person. It's just, it didn't work out. That's just how it is. Let's just not discuss this anymore. To me, I feel like she's trying to hand wave her way out of this without actually sitting with the fact that it's like, you did this.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It seems like she's still playing a mental game of hide the ball here with feelings of shame or regret or accountability. And not to the point of psychopathy where she doesn't have any access to painful or negative emotions, but it seems that she's gone through a lot of severe trauma, and there's a lot of processing that still needs to be done. And because that processing has not been done yet, and she hasn't fully looked in the mirror here, she's not going to give you this sense of accountability that you probably want.
I completely agree. And what a great place to sort of end this, not sort of, absolutely a great place to end this letter reading. So, Sean, thank you for sharing this. I'm so sorry you've been through this because this is hell on earth, and I could understand if it was very confusing. Cody, did you have anything just to finish off with regards to this letter?
I don't believe so. It was definitely an interesting read. So, yeah. Sorry that it happened to him.
I don't know about you, but I feel like this is very textbook though too.
For sure. Yeah. Which I think is good because we're able to touch on a lot of very common points that get brought up.
I completely agree. So just to round it here, thank you, Sean, and for you, Cody. So Cody, as a lot of you may know, as of listening to this episode, he's joined the team. Hooray! And obviously, he's got his own thing going on, but as part of the team, he's taking on clients as well too. So Cody, just for anyone who's interested, how can they look to work with you?
My website serves as a main hub for anyone that wants to get exposed to my content or wants to get on my schedule. It's codyweldon.com. And you can go through my About Me page. You can go and schedule a consultation directly and get routed to the appropriate channels.
And all that's also on my website as well too, for anyone's convenience who's listening on my site. But yeah, that's that. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you guys for the next letter reading.